Welcome to Moonlight Audio. I'm your narrator for tonight, and what you're about to hear is a mystery steeped in legacy, obsession, and the power of a single reflection. Tonight, we step into the world of Hercule Poirot, the legendary Belgian detective, as he unravels his most enigmatic case yet, the mystery of the Emerald Mirror. A shattered heirloom, a murder at midnight, and a gallery that echoes with secrets from centuries past. So settle in, dim the lights, and let the mystery unfold beneath the watchful eye of the mirror that sees everything, even the truth we dare not face. So let's begin. It was a Thursday evening in late March, and Paris had not yet surrendered to spring. The air carried a lingering bite, crisp with the memory of winter, while the gaslights along Rue du Vieux Columbia trembled in pools of fog. The street was quiet save for the occasional hum of a passing motorcar or the soft click of well-heeled shoes on stone. The Galerie Renaud sat nestled between a forgotten bookshop and a shuttered perfumery, an unassuming facade for what was, in whispered circles, one of the city's most enigmatic private art salons. Its windows were covered in thick velvet drapes. No posters. No signage. Just a small brass plaque beside the door that read only, "Ah." Tonight, however, the silence was broken. A row of dark cars lined the curb. A quiet buzz passed between guests cloaked in furs and tailored suits, their breath visible in the cool air as they awaited entry. Word had spread, La Miroir d'Emeraude would be revealed at last. The Emerald Mirror, lost since the Revolution, now returned. Or so they were told. Inside, the salon had been transformed. Gone were the scattered canvases, the modernist sculptures, the experimental collages. In their place, candlelight, gold filigree, a single velvet-draped easel at the center of the grand room. It stood like an altar, reverent and imposing, drawing every eye toward the shrouded mystery. Hercule Poirot arrived precisely at 7. He was not known to frequent such affairs, modern art did not amuse him, and gatherings of ego did not flatter his temperament. But this was different. The invitation had come by hand, delivered in a monogrammed envelope, sealed with wax and embossed with a symbol he had not seen in years, the sigil of the House of Tourniquet. He stepped through the doorway like a man crossing time. At once, he was met with soft music, something baroque, drifting from a phonograph in the corner. Champagne was offered on silver trays. Laughter tinkled like crystal, yet underneath it pulsed a curious tension. The kind that did not belong in polite conversation. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," came a voice to his left. "You grace us." It was Julien Renaud himself, the gallery's elusive curator. A man of 50, though his hair had silvered early and dramatically, swept back from a sharp widow's peak. His eyes were pale, almost translucent, and his suit was cut so perfectly it seemed he had stepped from the pages of a fashion sketch. Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur Renaud, I do not often attend exhibitions, but you have intrigued me." "And I intended to," Renaud said smoothly. "This mirror, it has a past. And like all good pasts, it is not entirely dead." Poirot said nothing, only observed. Around them, the guests shimmered with wealth and curiosity. An Italian countess with emerald earrings that outshone the room. A theatre producer known for dramas soaked in scandal. A pale-faced woman in white who said nothing and sipped absinthe from a gold-rimmed glass. Then there was Madame Alix Devine. Poirot noted her before she spoke. Her entrance was not loud, but it commanded. She wore black, severe in silhouette but soft in detail. Her gloves were sheer. Her veil barely concealed the scar that ran from cheekbone to ear. Once a muse to the Impressionists, now a recluse with a reputation as opaque as the mirror itself. She did not greet Renaud. She looked only at the easel. At exactly 7:30, the lights dimmed further. The candles flared with shadow. Renaud stepped to the front, hands clasped before him. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "tonight you stand not only in a gallery, but before a ghost. lost to revolution, hidden in ruin, and now reborn. With a theatrical sweep, he pulled the velvet cloth away. A hush fell over the room. There it was, the emerald mirror. Its frame was thick, sculpted in gilt and inlaid with 10 emeralds, real, untreated, impossibly green. Its glass was not smooth but subtly marbled, like ancient water frozen in time. And at its base, barely visible in the candlelight, a symbol carved in bronze, a crowned eye. It once hung in Versailles, Renaud continued. A gift to Marie Antoinette from a nobleman whose name was struck from history. After the Terror, it vanished. But it did not perish. Poirot took a slow step closer. He could see his reflection in the mirror, but it wavered slightly, as though the glass held its own memory, superimposed on the present. For a moment, he swore he saw a woman's face where his should have been. Pale, beautiful, frightened. He blinked. It was gone. He turned, but no one else seemed disturbed. Only Madame Devine, whose eyes did not leave the glass. The evening wore on with champagne and chatter. The guests took turns admiring the mirror, posing beside it, whispering theories and secrets. But beneath the surface, something curdled. An air of unease. A glance too sharp. A laugh too thin. Poirot observed it all. And at precisely 10 o'clock, he slipped quietly away. Not because he was tired, but because he had seen something in that mirror, something that did not belong. And because, as he stepped outside into the cold, Renaud's voice echoed faintly behind him. Some reflections cannot be escaped, no matter how deeply they are buried. That night, beneath the gaslight, the gallery door locked with a hollow click. Inside, the mirror waited in the dark. By morning, Julien Renaud would be found dead. And the mirror, shattered. The rain returned with the dawn. Not a storm, but a quiet, insistent drizzle, as though Paris herself had woken with a heavy heart. The iron balconies along Rue du Vieux Columbia dripped with cold. Curtains remained drawn. Street sweepers moved like ghosts. It was as if the city knew something had happened, and wished not to be involved. By 8 o'clock that morning, a constable stood guard outside Galerie Renaud, hat pulled low, collar high. The front door was locked, just as it had been when Hercule Poirot left the previous night. Just as it remained when Julien Renaud was found lying at the foot of the emerald mirror, glass fractured, and blood trailing beneath the emerald inlay. It was the cleaning woman who found him. Mademoiselle Laurette. 60 years old, blind in one eye, and known for speaking with saints when she mopped. She arrived at 7:30, as she always did, with a ring of keys and a wrapped cheese sandwich. When the door did not open from inside, she used her own key. She would later say she felt the death before she saw it. The gallery was still. The candles had all burned down to wax puddles. The phonograph was silent. Only the faint scent of champagne and something metallic lingered in the air. The mirror remained standing, but the floor before it was slick and red, and the curator's body was draped like a discarded curtain across the rug. Poirot received the call at precisely 8:12 a.m. He had not yet dressed. His grey dressing gown was neatly tied, and his slippers aligned with mathematical precision beneath the foot of his bed. He did not flinch when Inspector Gautier's voice crackled through the telephone. Galerie Renaud. Dead. It's the curator. You were there last night, yes. Poirot's fingers curled slightly on the receiver. Indeed, he said softly. And I suspect that the mirror was not the only thing broken. By the time Poirot arrived, the street had been cordoned off. A pair of constables stood watch while curious passers-by lingered across the street. The gallery's heavy door opened to reveal a very tired Inspector Gautier, coat damp, face lined, moustache half wilted. Ah, Monsieur Poirot. You have lost no time. Time is not to be lost when a man dies before breakfast, Poirot replied gently. Gautier led him inside. The gallery was as Poirot remembered, except for the cold. The candles had not been relit. The scent of iron was sharp now. A stain remained on the rug, despite the careful efforts of police. The mirror stood as before, though a jagged crack ran from top to bottom, dividing the face of any who dared peer in. The scene was undisturbed, Gautier said. Door locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. Windows closed. The body was positioned face down, no struggle, no defensive wounds. Anne. He paused. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And Gautier sighed. There was a note, tucked into the subject's vest pocket, folded precisely. He handed Poirot a small waxed envelope. Inside was a single card, aged and cream-colored, no larger than a business card. On it, written in immaculate calligraphy, "No reflection lasts forever." Poirot's brow creased. He turned the card over. Blank. No signature. No ink smudges. No dust. And yet the handwriting struck a chord in his memory, something from long ago. Something aristocratic. He examined the scene in silence for nearly an hour. The mirror had not merely cracked, it had split, precisely through the carved crest at the top, the crowned eye. Blood spatter formed a subtle arc, suggesting a sudden fall. A half-drunk glass of cognac sat on the nearby table, untouched since the previous night. No one had entered or exited. No staff remained overnight. No guest had been allowed to remain after the unveiling. Yet Julian Renaud was dead, and the mirror was not whole. At 10 a.m., Poirot requested access to the guest list. It was delivered by a trembling young man named Lucien, Renaud's assistant. Thin, pale, with ink-stained fingers and a voice barely above a whisper. He looked as though he hadn't slept in a week. Poirot studied him carefully. "You were not present last night." "No, monsieur. I was asked to leave before the guests arrived." Monsieur Renaud said the unveiling required a particular ambience. Poirot nodded. He opened the guest list. 18 names. Some familiar, some not. But each circled in elegant fountain pen. And beside one, written in a different hand, was a small symbol. An eye. Crowned. Poirot tapped it with a gloved finger. Who marked this? Lucien blinked. I don't know. I didn't handle that page. Only monsieur. Poirot said nothing. But inside, the pieces had begun to shift. By midday, the newspapers had arrived. Paris curator found dead after historic reveal. The curse of the emerald mirror. Was it murder or reflection? Poirot ignored them. Instead, he returned to his apartment on the Rue des Martyrs and retrieved a folder from his private archive, thick with press clippings, letters, and half-forgotten notes. At its center, he found what he was searching for. An article from 1911. A fire at a chateau outside Lyon. A burned room. A vanished heir. And a rumor of a mirror taken before the blaze. The photograph was grainy. But the frame. It matched. Exactly. Eyes closed. He did not yet have a motive. He did not yet have a name. But he had a shape. A silhouette forming behind the glass. And tomorrow, he would return to the gallery. Not as a guest, but as a hunter. For someone, somewhere among those gilded guests, had not come to admire the mirror. They had come to break it. And Julian Renaud had paid the price. The fog had lifted, but not the weight. By late morning, Paris had shrugged off its mist, but the Galerie Renaud remained under a veil of tension. Outside, the gendarmes still stood guard. Inside, the dust motes floated like ghosts in shafts of morning light. The mirror remained upright, its crack now covered with a sheet of linen, as though modesty might protect the room from memory. At precisely 10 o'clock, Hercule Poirot returned, not alone, but followed by a procession of finely dressed men and women. He had summoned them, each by personal note, written in his neat hand and delivered within hours of the news of Renaud's death. They had not dared refuse. The invitation was simple. I ask only for your presence, for clarity, for closure. No accusation shall be made. Only observation. Hercule Poirot. And so they came. One by one, they stepped across the gallery's threshold, under the cold eye of the constables, past the flickering lamps and drawn curtains. The very air seemed heavier than it had been 2 nights before. 18 guests had attended the unveiling. Now, 12 returned. 6 had refused, or vanished. Poirot made note of each. He stood by the covered mirror as the guests settled, their voices hushed. Chairs had been placed in a semicircle, as though this were a recital rather than an inquiry. But no music would be played. Only truth. Poirot did not raise his voice. He never needed to. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, you have been brought here not for judgment, but for remembrance. They looked at him, curious, polite, wary. Julian Renaud is dead. This you know. But what you may not know is how he died. Or why. A murmur passed through the group. Poirot allowed it. He glanced slowly across their faces. There was the Italian Countess, Lady Serafina di Argento, her emerald earrings conspicuously absent today. There was Henri Vallon, the theatre producer, shifting in his chair with poorly veiled impatience. And Madame Alix Devine, still in black, veil lowered, hands folded like porcelain. There was also the pale woman in white, Odette Messier, a poet known for her silence and her opium habit. She looked only at the floor. And near the back, quiet and observant, sat Inspector Gautier, pretending to be invisible. Poirot nodded. The mirror, he said softly, has been damaged. But it was not the only thing. Julian Renaud did not die of illness. He did not fall. He was, how shall we say, encouraged into eternity. Gasps fluttered like birds. Poirot continued. There was no sign of forced entry. No indication of struggle. The gallery was locked. And yet, someone here knows more than they have said. A long silence. Then Vallon laughed, short and bitter. You think one of us killed him? At an art show? This is absurd. Poirot raised a single eyebrow. Absurd, monsieur? Perhaps. But murder often is. He turned now to the easel beside him and drew away the linen sheet, not from the mirror, but from a new display. A board, pinned with notes. A timeline. A reconstruction of the evening. At 7 o'clock, the doors opened, he narrated calmly. Guests arrived. Champagne was served. Mademoiselle Quinn performed a short piece on the pianoforte. At 7:30, the mirror was unveiled. He tapped the center of the board. Most of you were gathered here, he gestured to a sketched floor plan, but some, and here his eyes moved to the Countess, drifted away for private conversations. Unrecorded. Unwitnessed. Serafina's lips tightened. Shortly before 10, I departed. The gallery was still populated. Monsieur Renaud was seen speaking quietly with Madame Devine. Then with Odette Messier. And then he retired to his study. He was not seen alive again. All eyes turned to the poet. She blinked slowly. I don't remember what he said, she murmured. He mentioned something about lineage, bloodlines. But his voice was strange, distant. Poirot nodded. That is helpful. He walked slowly across the room, his shoes silent on the carpet. I ask each of you now to remain in this space for the next hour. There will be no interrogation. No shouting. You will talk amongst yourselves. You will drink coffee. And I shall simply watch. A ripple of discomfort moved through the group. But I will ask one thing, Poirot added. As you speak, as you remember, I ask that you look, if only briefly, into the mirror. Gasps again. "You've covered it," said Valen. "Why?" Poirot's smile was thin. "Because some truths are seen more clearly when one believes no one else is watching." For the next 60 minutes, Poirot did exactly as he had promised. He watched. Not for words, but for gestures. The way Madame Devine hesitated before approaching the coffee table. The way Seraphina touched her wrist, though no bracelet was worn today. The way Valen refused to meet anyone's eyes. Odette, the poet, stood before the mirror longest. Her reflection was ghost-like in the fractured glass. She whispered something Poirot could not hear. Then turned away, tears on her lashes. At the stroke of 11, Poirot cleared his throat. "I thank you all," he said simply. "You may leave now." The guests blinked in confusion. "Leave," said Valen. "That's it." Poirot nodded. "For today." One by one, they departed. Only Madame Devine lingered. She stepped toward Poirot, her black gloves tight against her skin. "You believe I know what happened?" He did not answer immediately. Then, "I believe the mirror reflected more than beauty." She stared at him for a long moment. Then turned, and left. That afternoon, Poirot met with Inspector Gautier in a quiet corner cafe 2 streets away. "You think the answer lies in the past?" Gautier asked. Poirot stirred his coffee. "I think," he said slowly, "that the mirror has belonged to many. And each has left a mark. Some fingerprints are physical. Others, emotional. Generational. There is a chain here, mon ami. And the link is not yet broken." Gautier sighed. "So where next?" Poirot finished his drink. "Next, we visit a chateau. One that burned in 1911. Where a mirror vanished. And where a name was buried with the ashes. There is a particular chill in the French countryside in early spring, one that clings not to the skin, but to the bones. It was beneath such a sky that Hercule Poirot sat, poised within a hired motorcar as it wound its way through the narrow roads of the Loire Valley. Fields lay barren and sallow, and trees stood leafless like the skeletons of memories long past. His destination, Chateau Marcheret. Or rather, what remained of it. Nestled beyond a neglected orchard and half swallowed by vines, the chateau had once been the ancestral seat of the Vicomte de Marcheret, a lineage known less for nobility and more for scandal. In 1911, a fire had gutted the estate. The cause, never determined. The heir, never found. And from the ruins, one thing had vanished, a mirror framed in emerald and gold. Until now. The driver, a surly man named Louis with a thick mustache of his own, glanced at Poirot in the mirror. "You're certain this is the place, monsieur? There's nothing left but stone and stories." Poirot nodded once. "It is not the stone I seek, monsieur. It is the truth that clings to it." The car crested a hill, and there it stood, or rather, sagged. The chateau was a husk. Blackened timbers still jutted from the collapsed second floor like the ribs of a dead animal. The main hall remained standing, barely, its great arched doorway yawning into shadow. Ivy grew wild across what had once been gardens. Even the gates, twisted and rusted, looked ashamed to guard such decay. Poirot stepped out, shoes sinking slightly in the moss. The air here was heavy with silence. Not peaceful, but watchful. Inside the ruin, light filtered through the gaps in stone and broken roof. Ash still clung to the corners like a memory that refused to fade. In the far corner, a great fireplace stood undisturbed. Above it, a plaque carved with the symbol Poirot had now seen twice. The crowned eye. He studied it for a long time. And then, from the silence, came footsteps. Soft. Slow. Cautious. Poirot turned calmly. A woman stood in the doorway. Her age was impossible to guess, anywhere from 40 to 60, depending on the light. She wore a long wool coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and her face bore the unmistakable stamp of nobility worn thin by time. She did not speak at first. Poirot removed his hat. "Madam, forgive the intrusion. I am Hercule Poirot." She studied him for a long moment. Then, "I know who you are." Her voice was cultured, crisp. A voice that had commanded servants and silence. "I am Victoire de Marcheret," she said finally. "The last, I suppose." Poirot bowed. "I suspected as much." She did not ask why he was here. She simply turned and began to walk along the blackened hall. "They think it was my brother who caused the fire," she said. "Adrian. He was a boy of 17. Moody. Strange. Obsessed with legacy. He disappeared the night of the fire. Some say he died in the flames. Others say he fled to Paris. Perhaps both are true." Poirot followed her silently. "After the fire," she continued, "my father ordered that nothing be rebuilt. Let it rot, he said. Let it remind them what happens to those who chase reflections." Poirot's ears twitched slightly. Reflections. She nodded toward the space above the fireplace. "The mirror," she said simply. Poirot said nothing. He waited. Victoire stopped before a door that still hung precariously from its hinges. "This was Adrian's study," she said. "Locked since that night. I had it opened this morning. I don't know why. Some instinct." Inside, the room was better preserved than the rest, sheltered by stone and shadow. Dust blanketed every surface. But on the far wall, above a writing desk, hung an empty hook and a faint outline where something once had been. A rectangle. Poirot stepped forward. "Here it was," he said softly. "The mirror." Victoire nodded once. "And this," she added, lifting a folded letter from the desk, "was behind the drawer." She handed it to Poirot. It was sealed with wax, the same crowned eye. Poirot opened it carefully. "To whomever follows. I have taken it. I do not know why. Only that it calls to me. They say the mirror is cursed. That it sees too clearly. That it shows not who we are, but what we have hidden. If I perish, let it be known, I did not mean harm. Only truth. A.M." Poirot folded the letter and exhaled slowly. Adrian Marcheret had not vanished in fear. He had vanished in obsession. Later, outside in the cold wind, Victoire lit a cigarette with hands that did not tremble. "He wrote poems," she said suddenly. "Adrian. Dozens of them. About reflections. About burning. About a woman." Poirot turned to her. "A woman?" She nodded. He never named her. Only called her the one with no shadow. Poirot's mind raced. "Would you allow me to see them?" She hesitated, then handed him a small leather notebook. Poirot flipped it open. The first page read, "What lives behind the glass cannot die. It waits. It remembers. It reflects." And beneath that, "To Evelyn." Poirot froze. The name was unmistakable. "Evelyn Marchand," he whispered. Victoire looked away. "I never knew who she was," she said. "Only that Adrian was consumed." Poirot closed the notebook. The pieces shifted once more. The mirror. The fire. Adrian. And Evelyn Marchand. Back in Paris that night, Poirot sat alone by the window of his apartment. He had not yet informed Inspector Gautier of what he had found. Not yet. Instead, he placed Adrian's letter and notebook carefully beside the guest list from the gala. And then, using a pencil, he traced the symbol of the crowned eye beside a single name. Odette Messier. She had looked into the mirror too long. She had cried. And now he wondered, was it grief? Or memory? Or guilt? Poirot closed his eyes. He was close now. Not to the murderer, but to the motive. And in murder, That was the real beginning. The following morning in Paris dawned cold and grey, the kind of weather that dulled the edges of thought and wrapped the city in a haze of fatigue. But for Hercule Poirot, it was the clearest morning yet. In the quiet hours between 3 and 5, his mind had worked like a watchmaker's fingers, repositioning each gear of memory, observation, and history until a faint ticking had begun to emerge. Not the solution yet, but its rhythm. And that rhythm led to Odette Messier, the poet. The pale woman who lingered longest before the mirror. The one who wept. At 9:30, Poirot stood at her apartment door in Montmartre, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The building was a converted townhouse, filled with crumbling charm and the scent of old books. He rang once. The door opened not by Odette, but by a housekeeper, silent, wary. Wordlessly, she gestured for Poirot to enter. He stepped inside and was met by the quiet flicker of candles and the soft scrawl of a pen. Odette sat in a high-backed chair near the window, still in a silk robe of ghostly ivory, a notebook open on her lap. "You've come," she said without turning. "I was wondering how long it would take." Poirot approached slowly. "Madam," he said gently, "the past is a patient hunter. But eventually, it always finds its prey." She turned to look at him then, eyes dark with secrets and something else. Fear. Regret. Or memory. "I didn't kill Julian," she said before he asked. "But I knew he would die." Poirot did not blink. "Explain." She drew a breath that trembled. "The mirror," she began, "does not merely reflect. It reveals. Not the surface, but the self. What you've hidden. What you fear." Poirot waited. "In 1911, I was a girl of 15, she continued. "I lived in Lyon, near the Marcheret estate. My mother was the chambermaid to the Vicomtesse. That's how I met Adrian." The name dropped like a stone between them. He was strange, brilliant, fragile. He spoke of shadows, of destiny, of a mirror that saw too much. He said it belonged to his family, that it came from an older time when such things were revered and feared. Poirot nodded once. "He called it the Emerald Eye," she whispered. "And he claimed it had chosen him." Poirot could almost see the boy, wild-eyed, noble-blooded, on the brink of obsession. "And then the fire," he said. Odette's eyes filled. "He tried to save it. That's what killed him, I think. Not the flames, but what he saw. I was there, monsieur. I saw him drag the mirror out of the burning hall with bare hands. His arms bleeding. His face, smiling. Then he vanished. I never saw him again." Poirot took a step closer. "But the mirror lived on." Odette nodded. "Yes. It passed from hand to hand. Always in secret. Sold, gifted, stolen. And every time, someone suffered. Someone lost something they couldn't explain. Until it reached Julian." She closed her notebook. "He invited me because I knew its past. Because I'd seen it. But I warned him. I told him it would destroy him." Poirot's voice was soft. "And yet, you came." Odette looked away. "I thought, maybe it was time. Time to face it. But when I saw my reflection, monsieur, it wasn't me. It was the girl I was in 1911. The girl who let Adrian burn." Silence hung between them. Poirot did not speak for a long time. Then, "What did you see in his reflection?" Her lips trembled. "A crown. And a blade." Back at his flat, Poirot sat before his timeline. He now had something precious, context. Adrian Marcheret. Evelyn Marchand. Odette Messier. A chain of reflections that extended far beyond Paris. And somewhere along that chain was a motive, a reason to kill not just Julian Renaud, but the memory he tried to preserve. He picked up the guest list again. And that's when he saw it. A small, near-invisible pencil mark next to a name that had not yet meant anything. Benoit Marchand. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He picked up the telephone and dialed. By early evening, he stood before a vast gallery off Rue de Lille, modern, sleek, full of glass and minimalism. It belonged to Benoit Marchand, art financier, critic, and grandson of Evelyn Marchand. He met Poirot in a private lounge above the main exhibition. Tall, impeccably dressed, with hands too clean and smile too sharp. "You've come about the mirror," he said at once. Poirot inclined his head. "And its history." Marchand chuckled. "There is no history in art, monsieur. Only provenance. Paperwork. Hearsay sold as heritage." Poirot stepped closer. "And what of your grandmother, Evelyn? Her name appears in Adrian's poems. She was the one with no shadow." Marchand stiffened slightly. "She was a muse to many. But not to Julian Renaud. Yet he died with your name on his guest list." Marchand leaned back. "Renaud contacted me about the mirror months ago. Wanted to confirm its origins. I denied any connection. The Marchand family doesn't deal in superstition." Poirot studied him. "No. Only in silence." Marchand rose. "If you'll excuse me, Monsieur Poirot, I have no desire to resurrect ghosts." Poirot smiled slightly. Ghosts rarely wait for permission. That night, Poirot wrote a letter. Addressed not to police, nor to any suspect, but to himself. The mirror is not cursed. It is a ledger. Each owner leaves something behind. Not fingerprints, but truths. And whoever killed Renaud did not fear the mirror's power. They feared what it would reveal. He closed the letter, then reached for the only item he had never examined. Julian Renaud's final journal. He opened it to the last page. A list of names. Circled. And beneath it, in Renaud's own hand. One of them knows. One of them remembers. The mirror told me. Poirot sat very still. The killer was among them. And soon, they would all return to the gallery, one last time. It was a Thursday when the second summons arrived. Each of the 12 surviving guests received it. A letter sealed with wax, red, plain, unmarked save for a symbol many now recognized, the crowned eye. The note within was brief. "You are requested to return to Galerie Renaud at 6 o'clock sharp. Your presence is not optional. H.P. No pleasantries. No promises. Only inevitability." And so, as the light drained from the Parisian sky and the city moved beneath a slow drizzle, the same guests who had toasted Julian Renaud 2 weeks prior now returned, one by one, to a place where beauty and death had met. Inside the gallery, everything had changed. Gone was the linen covering the mirror. Gone was the gentle music, the clinking of glasses, the illusion of glamour. In their place, silence, stark light, and Poirot. He stood beside the emerald mirror, now upright and uncovered, its crack visible like a wound across its surface. He greeted no one, only gestured toward the semicircle of chairs. They obeyed. There was Odette Messier, her face pale but composed. The Countess Seraphina, adorned again in green. Henri Vallon, arms crossed and scowl deepening. Madame Alix Devine in mourning black. And Benoit Marchand, perfectly poised, as if posing for a photograph he'd never ordered. Poirot stepped forward. "When I first invited you here, it was for remembrance," he began. "Today, it is for reckoning." A quiet murmur passed through the group. Poirot did not raise his voice. "I will not accuse without certainty. That is not the way of Hercule Poirot. But I will reveal. And when all is revealed, then, Miss Amos, the murderer will speak. For they must." He turned now to the mirror. It begins with the glass. Always with the glass. This mirror is not an object of art, it is a passage of memory. Through it pass the lives of Adrian Marcheret, Evelyn Marchand, and Julian Renaud. And through it, too, pass shame, obsession, and finally, murder. Poirot now faced them all. The question is, who feared that memory most? He walked slowly, deliberately, before each guest. To Odette, you knew its history. You warned Julian. But you still came. Not to witness, but to repent. She looked down. To Vallon, you invested in Julian's gallery, yes? And yet threatened to cut funding 2 days before the unveiling. Why? Vallon scowled. He was obsessed. Ruining himself. I didn't kill him, I wanted to save him. Poirot nodded. Curious, then, that your financial ruin was kept hidden until his death wiped your debt clean. Vallon's face reddened. To the Countess, your emerald earrings. Missing. Were they sold, perhaps, to purchase something else? Something rare. Something reflective. She said nothing. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you, Madame Devine, widow of one of Renaud's earliest patrons. You argued with Julian in his study. Loud enough to be overheard. You said he had stolen something that belonged to you. Her voice was low. He had. Not a painting. A memory. Poirot gave a small bow. And memory, madam, is more dangerous than any blade. He turned now to the final guest. Benoît Marchand. Your grandmother was Evelyn. Your family denied any link to the mirror. And yet, Julian wrote your name. Circled it. Why? Marchand smiled coldly. He was desperate. Searching for ghosts. I gave him nothing. Poirot studied him. No, monsieur. You gave him fear. A beat of silence. Then Poirot stepped to the mirror. You see, he said softly, it is not what Julian discovered that killed him. It is who else knew. Someone who realized that once the mirror was unveiled, their secret, reflected in its cursed glass, would be exposed. He turned. And that person struck. Not with a knife. Not with poison. But with precision. Julian Renaud was found slumped in his chair, no wound, no bruise. And yet, dead. A hush swept the room. Poirot smiled faintly. A rare poison. Administered through contact. In his wine glass. Left untouched by him, until he lifted it to toast the mirror. A single sip. That is all it took. All eyes widened. And who poured that wine? Silence. Poirot's gaze locked with the housekeeper, standing silently at the back. She remembers. But she was paid to forget. He turned again. To pay someone off, one needs motive, money, and fear. And then Poirot walked to Benoît Marchand. You have all three. Marchand's jaw clenched. Poirot continued. Julian threatened to reveal the truth, that Evelyn Marchand did not die in disgrace, but in madness, driven there by Adrian Marcheret, by the mirror, and by what she saw. A truth that would have destroyed your fortune, your legacy, your myth. Marchand rose. This is slander. Poirot was calm. I do not slander. I reveal. As the mirror does. He gestured. Behind Marchand, the cracked mirror reflected the room, and in its fractured light, a detail caught the eye. A green-gloved hand. One no longer worn. Poirot stepped back. It was you who handled the mirror before the unveiling. You who inspected the gallery hours before anyone arrived. And it was you who replaced the cloth after the murder, ensuring your own fingerprints were never found. Marchand's voice was ice. You have no proof. Poirot turned now to the door. Inspector Gautier entered. In fact, Poirot said, We do. Gautier held a folded cloth in gloved hands. Inside, a broken wine glass, preserved, tested. Traces of a rare toxin. Marchand's signature, on a delivery slip for that exact chemical, used weeks before, for wood restoration. Poirot's voice dropped. And when Julian raised his glass, the toast became his death. Marchand did not run. He only sat down, as though finally free of weight. Poirot looked at the others. The mirror shows what we hide. But murder, Miss Amos, reveals who we are. And with that, the gathering was over. In the quiet stillness that followed Benoit Marchand's arrest, the gallery stood like a cathedral that had just expelled its heretic. Poirot remained behind after the guests dispersed, lingering in the silver hush that followed confession. But even as justice seemed delivered, something in his mind remained unsettled, not wrong, but incomplete. The mirror still stood in its place. Damaged, cracked, defiant. Poirot approached it slowly. No longer was it merely a prop in murder. It was a relic of something far more ancient and far less understood. The reflection that looked back at him was not distorted, but thoughtful. In it, he saw not just himself, but echoes of Adrian Marcheret, of Evelyn Marchand, of Julian Renaud. Of fire, obsession, and memory. There was more. He felt it in his bones. The mirror's story had not ended with Marchand's greed. It had begun long before. And so, Poirot returned to the one place in Paris where memory and fact collided, the Bibliothèque Nationale. In the manuscript's wing, beneath the domed ceiling and among the scent of vellum and parchment, Poirot consulted with an archivist named Madame Celestine, a sharp-eyed woman whose knowledge of obscure texts made her a legend in academic circles. "I seek information on an object," Poirot said. "An artifact once belonging to the Marcheret family. A mirror, framed in emerald." Celestine's eyes glittered. "Ah," she said. "The eye of Seraphine." Poirot blinked. "You know it." She nodded slowly. "It is not merely an object. It is a myth. Older than France. Older than Christianity." She returned moments later with a bound volume, worn, brittle, handwritten in Latin and Old Occitan. "Read this," she said. With her help, Poirot deciphered the tale. In the 13th century, during the height of the Albigensian Crusade, there lived a woman named Seraphine de Marival, a mystic, healer, and rumored seer. She claimed to possess a mirror crafted by monks from polished obsidian and rimmed with emeralds from the Levant. Through it, she said, one could glimpse not the future, but the truth, the soul as it truly was. She became both feared and revered. Nobles traveled miles to consult the mirror. Some returned broken. Others returned changed. Then, she vanished. The mirror passed into the hands of secret orders, vanishing and reappearing over the centuries. Each time, tragedy, madness, fire. It was last recorded, Celestine whispered, in the hands of a noble family near Lyon. Early 20th century. "The Marcherets," Poirot said. Celestine nodded. "It seems your murderer did not merely kill a man. They awoke a curse." Poirot did not believe in curses. But he did believe in obsession. In the stories we tell ourselves, and the lengths to which we go to protect them. He returned to his flat with new resolve. If the mirror had traveled centuries, it had witnesses. Chroniclers. There must be someone alive who had traced its path more recently. He poured himself a tisane and opened Adrian's leather-bound journal again. And there, on the final page, was a name he had not seen before. Contact Eleanor Dumas, curator, St. Lazare Archives. She knows. The St. Lazare Archives were tucked behind a deconsecrated chapel. Their curator, Eleanor Dumas, was a stern, silver-haired woman in her 70s with eyes like river stones. She welcomed Poirot with cautious grace. "I wondered when someone would come," she said. "The mirror has waited long enough." She led him to a chamber below the archives, a vault lined with wooden drawers and scroll tubes. The mirror, she explained, is one of 13 artifacts believed to be tied to a forgotten order, the Custodes Veritatis. The keepers of truth. They were not monks, not knights. They were witnesses. Historians of the soul. Poirot leaned forward. Why the mirror? Because it revealed what people dared not say. The truth they buried. Confessions unspoken. It was never meant for vanity, Monsieur Poirot. It was meant for judgment. She handed him a parchment, an ink sketch dated 1682. It was unmistakable. The emerald mirror. In it, a noblewoman stared at her reflection while flames licked at the edges. Her hands were raised not in prayer, but in fear. It has always ended in fire, Eleanor whispered. Because people would rather burn than be known. That night, Poirot stared once more at the object now housed under lock in the police evidence chamber. The mirror. Silent. Watching. He understood now. The mirror was not cursed. It was a test. A truth no one wanted. A reflection too honest. It did not lie. It merely waited. And when it finally showed the truth, someone always tried to break it. But glass does not forget. It only cracks. And in every crack, it remembers the one who tried to silence it. The morning after his visit to Eleanor Dumas, Hercule Poirot rose earlier than usual. Outside his apartment, the Parisian streets remained slick with dew, the first light filtering across the rooftops like memory returning to the mind. Inside, Poirot sat with his hands folded on a linen napkin, eyes closed, breathing the steam of his tisane. Today, he would return to the beginning. Not of the case, but of the mirror. The St. Lazare archives had revealed one great truth. The mirror was not merely an antique, it was a relic. A vessel of confession, of unbearable clarity. But what was it reflecting now? He returned to the Galerie Renaud. Though the crime scene had been cleared, the gallery remained sealed, preserved by order of the police. But Poirot had special permission. The doors opened with a reluctant creak, and he stepped into the stale stillness. The emerald mirror stood beneath a white sheet. Poirot removed it. The cracked glass greeted him like an old adversary. He stared into it, not seeking visions, but memory. And suddenly, it came, not a revelation, but a question. What if Benoit Marchand had not acted alone? What if Julien Renaud's death was the final act of something that had begun long ago? Poirot closed his eyes. He saw Evelyn Marchand, Adrienne Marcheret, Odette, the girl at the estate. The mirror had survived them all. And what of Séraphine de Marival, the mirror's first known keeper? She, too, vanished in fire. And then Poirot saw something else. A pattern. The mirror always returned. But it never remained. Why? Because someone was ensuring it never stayed long enough to reveal too much. That afternoon, Poirot called on Madame Alix Devine. The widow had withdrawn from public view since the second gathering. Her townhouse on the left bank was modest, darkened by heavy curtains and loss. She greeted Poirot in silence. He studied her. You knew Julien Renaud better than most, he said. Not as a benefactor, as a friend. Perhaps more. She nodded slowly. He was my husband's godson. But more than that, he was a believer. In beauty. In legacy. Poirot took a seat. And in secrets, he added. Madame Devine looked away. Poirot leaned forward. Madame, I must ask you plainly, did you know Benoit Marchand planned to kill him? She flinched. Just barely. But enough. He continued. You protected Marchand. Not because you approved, but because you feared what would follow. If the mirror spoke, the Marchand name would fall. And with it, perhaps your husband's legacy. Tears welled in her eyes. I told him not to go that night. I told Julian to delay the unveiling. But he would not. He believed the truth would cleanse the past. Poirot stood. And instead, it burned it. That night, Poirot returned once more to his wall of notes. Strings connected names, places, times. At its center, the mirror. And now, a new thread. Who benefits from its destruction? Not just Benoit. He followed the trail of buyers, of whispers. One name appeared more than once. A name that had eluded him. Lucien Marekel. A dealer in antiquities. Known for acquiring rare relics. Always a step behind or ahead of the Emerald Mirror. Poirot made a call. Marekel's office was on the Rue de l'Université. The man himself was tall, hunched like a crow, eyes darting. The mirror, Marekel said, brings misfortune. Every time it reappears, someone dies. Yet you tried to buy it from Renaud. A pause. Then, I wanted to lock it away. Destroy it. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You wanted to erase its memory. Marekel did not deny it. Some reflections should never be seen. Poirot rose. But truth, monsieur, has a habit of surviving even the darkest glass. Back at his flat, Poirot wrote a final note in his journal. The mirror burns not with flame, but with memory. And memory, when denied, becomes vengeance. He looked at the cracked mirror one last time, and in it, saw not just the past, but what was to come. The air in Paris grew colder as the week edged toward its end, as though the city itself were holding its breath. In his apartment, Poirot moved with careful intent, the rhythm of his thoughts aligning with the ticking of his antique clock. He knew the end was close. But endings, he believed, must be earned, not merely found. The Emerald Mirror had revealed its pattern. Death followed reflection. And those who sought to own or bury its truths always came undone. Yet one truth remained elusive: who had truly orchestrated the chain of possession? He returned once more to Adrian Marcherette's journal. Within its yellowing pages, a line stood out that had escaped him before. The mirror does not choose. It listens. But what it hears must one day be spoken. What had it heard? Who had silenced it? Poirot's next visit was to someone who had remained notably in the background, Inspector Gautier. They met in a quiet café on Rue Oberkampf. The inspector wore the look of a man who had followed too many ghosts. "You're not done, are you?" he said. Poirot smiled faintly. "Non, mon ami. The surface has been cleaned. But the stain remains." Gautier sighed. "You believe Marchand was only the weapon?" Poirot stirred his coffee. "I believe he was a pawn. Willing, yes. But not alone." The inspector leaned in. "There's a rumor. A buyer. Someone who commissioned Julian to display the mirror publicly. Paid him handsomely. Disappeared after the murder." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "A name?" Gautier shook his head. "Only initials. V.D." Poirot froze. The Marcherette estate had once been owned by a Vicomte d'Artois. He returned home at once. In his files, beneath correspondence, records, and clippings, he found it. Vicomte Dorian d'Artois. A collector. A recluse. Once believed to be dead, but whispered to still operate through intermediaries, acquiring dangerous relics for private use. Poirot reached for the phone, but stopped. Some answers required more than conversation. They required confrontation. The next day, Poirot sent a letter. Elegant, brief, and addressed to every guest from the original soirée, including Lucien Marekel, Madame Devine, and, anonymously, V.D. "You are cordially summoned to the final unveiling of the Emerald Mirror. Midnight. The Galerie Renaud." He signed it, Hercule Poirot. Then he waited. And at midnight, they came. One by one, the guests entered the gallery. The mirror stood uncovered. Poirot welcomed them with a single nod. "Tonight," he said, "we shall listen." He turned to the mirror. "In the past weeks, we have spoken of reflections, of obsessions, of secrets too great to bear. But the time has come to stop observing, and to act." His voice grew sharper. "Someone in this room used Marchand as a dagger. Someone funded Julian Renaud only to silence him. And someone, perhaps many, wish this mirror buried again." A silence followed. Then, a voice. Faint. Refined. Tired. "I did what I must." All eyes turned. From the shadows stepped a figure none had seen before. Vicomte Dorian d'Artois. He looked older than time, his hands gloved, his eyes sunken. "The mirror belonged to my family once," he said. "It destroyed my mother, my uncle, Adrian, all of them. I spent decades trying to contain it." Poirot stepped forward. "So you funded Julian's exhibit, to trap it again?" Dorian nodded. But he turned. He wanted the truth free. "And so, I persuaded Marchand." Gasps filled the gallery. Poirot's voice was quiet now. "You feared the truth. But it was never the mirror's fault. It merely listened. You chose to act." The Vicomte bowed his head. "I wanted to protect the world." "No," Poirot said. "You wanted to protect yourself." A single note sounded, a police siren outside. Gautier entered. The Vicomte did not resist. He simply turned, one last time, to the mirror. And in it, saw not fear, but peace. Poirot looked at the others. "The storm is ending," he said. But not before it revealed every whisper that dared hide in silence. The gallery was silent again. Empty, save for Hercule Poirot. The emerald mirror stood under a shroud of velvet, but Poirot did not remove it. Not yet. There was something sacred in the waiting. As dawn filtered across the floorboards of Galerie Renaud, he walked in slow circles, collecting his thoughts like a priest preparing for confession. The storm, he had said, had ended. But some storms linger, even after the skies clear. Echoes in the walls. Secrets in the floorboards. Now came the final moment, not of justice, but of reckoning. Poirot had solved murders before. Countless. But this case had revealed something deeper than crime. It had revealed legacy. And legacy, he knew now, was not built on wealth or memory, but on truth. Later that morning, he received a visitor. Madame Odette Messier. She entered slowly, dressed not in mourning, but in simple, unassuming grey. She carried no bag, no gloves, only a letter. "I've written it down," she said quietly. "All of it." Poirot gestured for her to sit. She did not. "Julian trusted me," she began. "And I failed him. Because I knew what the mirror could show. And I let him look anyway." Poirot tilted his head. "You believed he needed to see it." "I believed he would survive it." Her voice faltered. "But I underestimated how much he feared what he would find." Poirot stepped forward. "And what did he find, madam?" Her eyes glistened. A glimpse of himself. Not as an artist. Not as a man. But as a child. Alone. Forgotten. The mirror didn't show his brilliance. It showed his wounds. Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "And wounds, when ignored, become weapons." He spent the afternoon reading her letter. It was not a confession of guilt, but of sorrow. Odette had witnessed the mirror's effect firsthand, on Adrian, on Evelyn, and now on Julian. And through it all, she had remained silent. Hoping, perhaps, that history would not repeat. But history does not forget. Only people do. That evening, Poirot returned once more to the heart of the matter. He stood before the emerald mirror, and removed the velvet. The cracked glass stared back. He studied his reflection, not to see himself, but to see what the mirror would offer. The room behind him, fractured. The shadows bent. But in his own eyes, he saw only weariness. Then, movement. A flicker. A shape that should not have been there. He turned. Nothing. He faced the mirror again. And there it was, a face, faint but certain. Julian Renaud. Not smiling. Not mourning. Watching. Poirot did not flinch. Instead, he spoke. You were not the last. Only the loudest. The face faded. Poirot's voice grew firmer. The mirror shows not death, but silence. It reflects what we refuse to say. And that, Miss Amos, is why it must remain. Not hidden. Not destroyed. But witnessed. He covered it once more. The next day, the authorities relocated the mirror, not to a vault, but to the Musée des Ambers, where it would be placed not in a gallery, but in a sealed chamber. No placard. No announcement. Only a key. Held by one man. Poirot. In his final report, he wrote, "The mystery is resolved. The deaths avenged. But the mirror remains. It is not the object that haunts us, it is what we bring to it. The truth is not in glass, but in conscience." He signed it simply, Hercule Poirot. And with that, the curtain fell. The mirror, silent. The dead, heard. The truth, whole. It began, as many of Poirot's cases did, not with a crime, but with a question. But as the final chapter closed on the emerald mirror, it was not answers he held, but clarity. In the weeks that followed the mirror's relocation, Paris exhaled. The papers printed the story as a tale of madness and heritage, of secrets and their keepers. The name of Vicomte Dorian d'Artois slipped once more into shadows. Odette Messier vanished into obscurity. The gallery remained shuttered. But for Poirot, the case lingered. Not as an unsolved riddle, but as an open wound. One grey morning, he sat before the fire in his flat on the Rue des Martyrs, writing not in his casebook, but in a private journal. There are mysteries which end in justice, others in punishment, but some end only in understanding. And that, Miss Amos, is the rarest triumph of all. He closed the book. The mirror had been an object, but also a witness, a reflection of human frailty. Inspector Gautier came to visit him that afternoon. They shared a pot of tea, and silence. Gautier spoke first. "You're not satisfied." Poirot offered a tight smile. "I am resolved. But that is not the same." The inspector leaned back. "You think the mirror will return?" Poirot stared into his cup. "No," he said. "But something like it always does." Gautier left a file behind, his own notes. Poirot read them that night, slowly, methodically. One name caught his eye. Genevieve Marcheret. Distant relative. Artist. Last seen leaving France years ago. He smiled. The mirror's story, perhaps, was not over. But this part was. Weeks passed. Poirot resumed his routines. A modest case here. A forgery, quietly solved. But something had shifted. He spent more time near the Seine, watching the water carry light and shadow downstream. Then, one day, a letter arrived. From an unnamed sender. "You may not remember me, Monsieur Poirot, but I remember you. I am painting again. Not mirrors. People. And for the first time, I see them." He folded it carefully. The handwriting, elegant. Familiar. He did not need a signature. Odette. That evening, Poirot lit a single candle. Not for remembrance, but for reflection. He looked into the flame. and in its flicker, saw no ghosts. Only the truth, unchanged, but understood. And so concludes the mystery of the Emerald Mirror, a case not just of murder and secrets, but of what we choose to carry, and what we choose to see. If this story lingered in your mind, if the whispers in the glass still echo, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Moonlight Audio, where mysteries unfold in the stillness, and truth is always just beneath the surface. Until the next story, keep your eyes open, your lights low, and your mind sharp. Good night, from Moonlight Audio.